Hello, my name is Hemingway Jones. Welcome to the channel. Today, I am going to show you how I use fountain pens and journals out in the field while we take a trip to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, which was the site of the biggest art heist in history. This is dark academia in action. By the end of this video, you will learn all about this museum and its history, the remarkable woman who built it, my personal special connection to this museum, and I guarantee you that will surprise you. And I will also reveal some secrets about this museum that only I know since I used to work there. So come with me, won't you, while we explore fountain pens, journals, and journaling in the pursuit of great handwriting at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Before going anywhere, and especially to a museum, I always like to choose the proper journal and fountain pen for the occasion, especially for my dark academic excursions. For today, it will be the Esterbrook Write Your Story Journal in camel. It has 80-pound fountain pen friendly paper with helpful lines. I use this book as my handwriting library. It contains samples of penmanship from various people across the years, all done in my hand. For a fountain pen, I've chosen the perfect tool for the job, a Montblanc 146 with a calligraphy nib. This flex nib helps put the emphasis where I need it when copying vintage handwriting styles. It is also perfectly suited for my hand, and it is a joy to write with. It's also an incredible fountain pen for dark academia, based on its amazing ability for calligraphy and for handwriting. It began, as it often does, with a tragedy. Little Jackie was almost 2 years old when he passed away in 1865 from whooping cough. Isabella was devastated, depressed, incapacitated for months until her husband, in desperation, took her to Europe, where she had once been happy exploring the museums and the art there. She slowly began to recover, to gain more and more of her inner spirit. This inspired a passion for art, but not just for viewing it. Mrs. Gardner wanted to possess them. So how do I approach and use this museum? Many ways. The Courtyard is wonderful for journaling and for quiet contemplation. Even when it is crowded, there are always spots you can find just for yourself. I miss those moments when I had it to myself, when I worked there. During one special meeting, I was even able to walk around inside the courtyard and to see the ancient Roman mosaic up close. That was an amazing experience I will never forget. Since the museum looks so much like a Venetian palazzo, I would visit any time I was missing Venice. It truly feels like a piece of Venice in Boston. I loved to just wander the galleries, and working there solidified this place as a special treasure in my mind and in my imagination. Over the years, Mrs. Gardner developed a very good eye for collecting, acquiring thousands of objects, including works by Titian, Botticelli, Vermeer, Raphael, and Rembrandt, not to mention the textiles, sculptures, and rare books. Isabella Stewart Gardner was one of the foremost female patrons of the arts of her day. She was friends with some of the leading artists and writers of her time, including John Singer Sargent, James McNeill Whistler, and Henry James. The character of Millie in The Wings of the Dove was based on Mrs. Gardner. Around a decade ago, I worked as a volunteer at this amazing museum. I used to answer questions about the art in the galleries, and with their training, I basically achieved a graduate degree in this museum. But much more importantly, my wife was in the same program, and I actually met her there. So I have the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum to thank for my marriage, for my daughter, for all the happiness I have in my life right now. So me and my family have a very special connection to this wonderful, magical place. Mrs. Gardner was obsessive about the placement of each item in her museum, arranging them around the galleries and often putting them in relationship to each other, but mysteriously, sometimes in baffling ways, and she left no notes. She used some of the rooms for other purposes in her lifetime. John Singer Sargent famously painted the portrait of Mrs. Fiske Warren and her daughter in the Gothic room. Neither did she want labels on her items, preferring the viewer to discover each object on their own in a unique setting. Mrs. Gardner left a will that stipulated that nothing in the museum in her collection could be disturbed in any way. If it was, the entire collection was to be crated, shipped to Paris, auctioned off, and the proceeds would go to Harvard University. In 2011, the museum had outgrown its space and needed a new concert hall and a new building beside it to preserve the old building. So they had to go to probate court for permission to move a display on one wall so they could break through the building to have access to the original palace. Now, sadly, there was one night when more than just a single wall or single item was disturbed. In the middle of the night of March 18th, 1990, two thieves dressed as Boston police gained access to the building. They were able to circulate around the galleries in the museum for several hours, and they stole 13 masterworks, including Rembrandt and Vermeer. They basically raided the cultural heritage of Boston. The frames remain empty in the gallery. They stand as place markers for what is missing, in hopes that they might be returned one day. The rooms are heavy with the absence of their loss. Now, I was lucky enough to go into the basement where the guards had been tied up, and I actually put my hands on those pipes where they were tied. So all of that has since been subsumed by the new building that they built in 2011. But it was really interesting to see the exact spot where much of this went down. Now, I also think it's really sad that for many people, all they think about in relation to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is the heist. Now, it's terrible what was lost, but there's so much still there, and it is a wonderful museum, and I highly recommend you visit it the next time you're in Boston. Mrs. Gardner was not able to hide from tragedy for long. In 1898, her beloved husband, John Gardner, died. This time, she focused her grief on her lifelong goal of building a museum. Not just any museum, but a Venetian palazzo treasure box rising from a then swamp in the Fenway neighborhood of Boston. It was finished in 1903, and she celebrated with a party of her favorite foods, champagne and donuts. The galleries are amazing. Even just walking around is so atmospheric. But the museum also has an amazing collection of correspondence, featuring fine examples of vintage handwriting to emulate for better penmanship. I always seek these out to study their pen strokes and to try to incorporate that style into my own writing. One of the main reasons I began my healthy obsession with fountain pens to begin with was because I wanted to write in the same way that people did back in the early part of the 20th century. The Gardner collection of letters offers an excellent way to see that style of writing up close and to learn from it so that you might incorporate some of that style into your own penmanship. I know I have tried, and I've enjoyed just reviewing these amazing letters in their fantastic setting. Like many Venetian palazzos, this one was internally oriented. At the center of it all is a lush tropical garden surrounding a Roman mosaic floor that was discovered at the Villa of Livia. And there are many ancient statues that punctuate the corners of this magical garden. Several balconies, salvaged from Cadoro in Venice, surround it and rise above. These balconies were purchased when the then owner of Cadoro decided they wanted a modern house and stripped their facade. Years later, Cadoro would be restored, but it was never able to get all of its balconies back because several are still in place at the Gardner Museum. From these, on the various floors, you can view the garden from many different angles, and this adds incredible layers to its beauty. An amazing thing about this museum is that it was not just a museum for Mrs. Gardner. She would also live there, but not downstairs as many people think, among the galleries that the public now strolls. No, she would live on the 4th floor for the rest of her life, in fact. She even died there in 1924. Surrounded by these innumerable treasures and this incredible magical world that she made through the power of her will. Another day when I worked there, I was also fortunate enough to go up to the 4th floor where Mrs. Gardner's living quarters were. Now, a lot had changed since her time. Her bedroom was now transformed into the director's office, but some of her furniture was there, the wallpaper, some of the wall treatments were still in place, and many of the other rooms had been turned into cubicles and storage. But the kitchen seemed to be largely intact, with a lot of her dishes neatly wrapped and labeled, with the staff's Cheetos and whatnot sort of wedged in between. It was pretty exciting in those days, very interesting to see where she had actually lived. I enjoy carrying the torch of history further, in my dress and in my handwriting. I consider the study of penmanship essential to how I express myself, and how I interact with my world. It is also part of the dark academic aesthetic, where an interesting script is a calling card that someone has taken the time to evolve their writing to the point where it brings delight to whomever sees it. I enjoy this about handwriting and celebrate a finely crafted sentence. I will continue to work on my handwriting, continue to explore new and interesting places where I might discover different examples of old script that I might incorporate into my own style. This is one of my quests, and I enjoy it, and it has taken me to some amazing places, not the least of which is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Mrs. Gardner left behind a legacy for the education and enjoyment of the public forever, in her words. She also left an example of tenacity, of survival, of pushing beyond your pain, your tragedies, and funneling that energy into something magical, something enduring, that still expresses the essence of who she was. That had a great effect on me. And when I think about it, that museum also had a lasting effect on me and my family. Forever. So, what do you think of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum? Isn't it just an amazing place? It's just a treasure box that's constantly revealing its secrets. What do you think of dark academia in action? This is my way to discover more types of handwriting and to incorporate it into my own personal style. Let me know in the comments. So please consider subscribing to this channel, and if you want to get even more involved, consider becoming a member. I'd love to have you. Also, I release new videos each week, and I have a live show Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. So I can promise you, we will see each other again very soon, further up the road. So take care.
La